Hey everybody, I'm Logan Haley with Epic Gardening. Welcome to the Great Grow Along. And today I'm here to introduce some homesteading heroes or sheroes. These three lovely ladies are experts in their homesteading fields, and I'd love for them to share a little bit about what they do. Megan, can you start us off?
Sure. So I'm Megan or Meg. You can call me Meg. I'm the content creator behind Meg Grows Plants. And I do a little bit of everything. So I garden, I have chickens, and I just recently introduced bees as well. And I'm living in an urban environment. I'm in North Carolina, in the city of Charlotte. So I do live in the city. So I'm kind of little like micro homesteading in my little quarter of an acre backyard, trying to squeeze in like everything that I possibly can. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Nicole, can you tell us a bit about where you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Nikki. I'm in Ohio. I run the social media channels Purely Chickens. And my main gig, obviously, is chicken keeping. I hatched my first chicken eggs in 2006, and I've been obsessed ever since. And I thought it was one of those hobbies I would just like get over, but I cannot stop. So I do a lot of chicken keeping. I'm an author. I've got a book called Chicken Keeping Pure and Simple. And at my house, we have between myself and my parents next door, I've got like 17 acres, and we've got goats, geese, chickens, bees, gardens, but mostly obsessed with chickens. And even my garden is chicken centered. So we close it off to them in, gardening season, but at the end of the season, when we've harvested what we wanted, we open it up to them. So everything is chicken safe in our garden, and they go in and clean it out, which is really nice because you don't have to weed the garden towards the end of the year. You just let them handle it and they clear it out for the next season. So that's mostly what I do is just chickens.
Spring is coming soon, very soon, which means that myself, Jacques, and all of you watching at Great Grow Along are going to be getting out in the garden, which means we're going to need to stay hydrated, which brings us to today's sponsor, Element. Well, what is Element? It is a zero sugar electrolyte drink mix, perfect for gardeners and anyone who enjoys the outdoors. I have been using it for about 6 or 7 months now. I love all of the flavors, but I love watermelon salt, citrus salt, or raspberry salt. Absolutely delicious, and they provide a meaningful dose of electrolytes free of sugar, artificial colors, or any other dodgy ingredients, which is super important, especially if you're a gardener trying to grow your own food and know what's going into your body. Element is perfect for gardeners like us, specifically formulated for anyone on a mission to restore health through hydration. So 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium gets you the electrolytes that you need. And for you Great Grow Along attendees, you can get a free Element sample pack with your first order at drinkelement.com/GGA, which is drinklmnt.com/GGA. And of course, if you don't like it, you can return it for a full refund, no questions asked.
I love that. Once you get the chicken itch, you can't stop, right? And Shani, can you tell us a little bit about where you are and what homesteading projects you're into?
Hey guys, my name is Shani McCabe. I am a grower in Zone 9B in Central Florida. I'm in a town called Mount Plymouth, Florida, which is about 35 minutes north of Orlando. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Sorry. So I'm about 35 minutes north of Orlando, Florida, which means I'm almost completely frost free, except we do get occasional surprise freezes. Once out about every 7 years. We actually just got our like 7 year big freeze this winter. Um, but yeah, I have an acre and a half of land. I'm growing a food forest. I've got some baby chicks. I've got a raised bed garden, and I've got in-ground plantings. I have a background in managing small organic farms and also working in the heirloom seed industry. So I've done some global travel for my previous job with the heirloom seed company I worked for. And so I've seen lots of different varieties and growing methods. And now I'm kind of bringing all of that information for the last 15 years working in the industry to my little homestead in my backyard. And I have a YouTube channel that's about to launch through Epic Gardening, and it's called Florida Food Forest. And I also currently have an Instagram and Facebook channel called Plant Sages. And Plant Sages is just me and my husband kind of tooling around in the garden. he has a PhD in horticulture and I have a bachelor's in horticulture. So together we kind of use our knowledge of plant science to teach people about gardening. We love tropical and subtropical fruits and food forests. So basically, yeah, a lot of tropical, subtropical food forest stuff going on over here. Though I'm not originally from Florida, I'm a transplant here, so I am learning along, with my followers because I am originally from New England, so kind of switched it up from learning how to grow with very cold winters and mild summers to very mild winters and extraordinarily hot summers.
Lovely. That sounds so interesting. So we have a wealth of knowledge and a great diversity of growing zones and backgrounds to share with you guys. Just a little bit about me. Again, I'm Logan Haley with Epic Gardening. I am the blog editor for our Epic website. I'm also a garden writer, horticulturalist, and a former organic vegetable farmer. Now I homestead out in Western Wyoming. So we have quite the range of zones here. I'm actually in zone 2, and Shani just mentioned she's in zone 9, and then Meg and Nikki are in between. So we have a range of temperatures and climates to discuss. And before we get into all of this exciting information, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor today, Element. So we're gearing up for spring and we all need to stay really hydrated in the garden. I'm also a holistic nutritionist, so what Element does is very close to my heart. They provide this amazing sugar-free, all-natural electrolyte drink with magnesium to help rev up your brain and your bones and your energy and help us stay hydrated as we're working on our homesteads. I have been in definitely a lot of situations actually this winter where I was super cold, get out there planning our greenhouse and working on some different projects. And I didn't really feel like hydrating that much because I was so cold, but the Element drinks got me all the electrolytes and hydration I needed. So there's a ton of different Element flavors. My favorite is the citrus. You can put the meaningful dose of electrolytes free of sugar, artificial colors, and any other sketchy ingredients right into water or any other beverage and enjoy it in your garden. Element is specifically formulated for anyone on a mission to restore their health through hydration. It has 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of that lovely magnesium. So Great Grow Along attendees can get a free Element sample pack with any purchase at drinkelement, lmnt.com/GGA. That's drinklmnt.com/GGA. And if you don't like it, you can return it for a full refund, no problem. And thanks again to Element for sponsoring our Great Grow Along this weekend. So let's get this panel started. We want to dive a little deeper into these different homesteading ideas so we can really explore the breadth of knowledge that all of these wonderful women bring to the table. But of course, we got to talk about our origin stories of how we got into gardening and homesteading. Shani gave us a little bit of background, but we'd love to hear a deeper dive into everyone's history. Meg, could you start us off? What made you decide to expand your initial little home garden into a bigger and broader homestead?
Yeah, so first and foremost, like my love of plants started when I was in college. I was getting my degree in biology and I took a botany class. And I just remember like that was the moment that clicked for me. And I was like, I shouldn't even be getting a degree in biology. Like I should be getting a degree in botany, but it was too late for me. Um, and that's when my love of plants started. And then at the time, like we traveled a little bit. We lived in apartments, so I balcony gardened a little bit. But my social media page was actually started out as a houseplant page. I used to have over 100 houseplants in my little apartment that I would take care of. So I've always had a jungle, whether it's indoors or outdoors, but it really started when we moved to our house in 2020. And I basically just saw the backyard as like a blank slate. And I started with 2 little raised garden beds, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and it kind of snowballed. And I eventually just turned my entire backyard into like a little mini homestead. First was the garden beds, then came the chickens, then came the bees. And for me, all in all, it just nurtures my mental health. I think that's like my primary why for my homestead. I'm not doing it like for prepping or anything like that. There's no problem with that. But like for me, my why is just like it connects me to nature and it just makes me feel happy. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, the mental health piece is so important. And I notice a big contrast between when I used to be a production organic vegetable farmer versus homesteading and gardening. There's a lot more peacefulness to be experienced in the garden where we can just experiment and follow our whims and creative excitement. So that's really cool to hear how the house plants bridged over into all the other projects. And you also mentioned you're getting into beekeeping. What was your entry point into that?
Again, just thinking back to my getting my degree in biology, like we also, I remember this bio in class, we were talking about bees and just becoming so fascinated with the science of bees. They're just, it's incredible how they operate as like one super organism instead of a bunch of different ones. Like each bee has its own place in the hive and how they work together is just fascinating to me. And my grandfather used to be a beekeeper. He wasn't a beekeeper when I knew him, but he was when he was younger. I would hear stories from my dad or my dad would tell me stories about like how they would go and see the beehives. I think he had like an entire apiary. So it was just kind of inspiring, like, oh, like I can kind of channel my grandfather since he's no longer here with us anymore. Um, and yeah, like the honey is just like an extra perk for me. It wasn't even about the honey. I just think that they're fascinating and I love observing them. I think it's like so cool to look inside of a beehive and just be with the bees.
I love that. And beekeepers are among the longest lived profession, a recent fun fact I found. Cool. So,
I
Nikki,
can see it.
yeah, for sure. Because you get
Yeah.
all that relaxation, the buzz, the
It's,
vibrations, all the honey.
yeah. Mhm.
Nikki, could you dig into a little bit of how you started? You told us how you first had that your first small garden and then you expanded into chickens and now you have all these animals. Can you dig a little deeper into that origin story?
Sure. So growing up, my parents lived on the property we're on now, and my dad is a huge gardener. He grew up doing it, and he has like a big garden, which we now kind of share as like our people garden that doesn't have chicken safe stuff in it. And then when we got a little older, he offered a piece of land to my husband and I to come build. So we built on the land with him, and just kind of grew up and as an adult garden with my dad. I am a teacher by trade. I used to teach in public school and I taught kindergarten. So that's when I hatched my first egg back in 2006 and hatched with my classroom. And as soon as that first egg, was showing signs of life inside, I was hooked and I had to have chickens too. So that's kind of where that started. I had a mentor teacher back then who was doing it with her classroom and, she was older and she's like, you got to try it. You would love it. And I've always loved animals. Growing up here with my parents, I was always like, Dad, let's get goats. Let's get goats. Let's get goats. And he was like, no, we're not doing that. You're not getting goats. So we moved in next door. I said, Dad, we're getting goats. He was like, I guess I can't control that anymore. You're an adult. Turns out my dad was right. I'm not a huge fan of keeping goats. I love my goats. Don't get me wrong, but they're just like a little bit, they don't serve any purpose here other than eating poison ivy. We don't breed them, so we don't get milk from them. And it's, as far as homesteading goes, they don't really serve a huge purpose for us, but we love them. We're going to keep them and give them their forever home. And then we added geese to our property last year or 2 years ago. There was just a random post on Facebook. Somebody said, I have this goose. They called it a he. He's deformed. He's got some issues. And I said, bring him to my house. I'll take care of him. Really bad shape. I wrote a children's book about him because it actually turned out to be a girl and she has a great story. So anyway, added geese and then we just keep expanding the chickens every single minute, I feel like. So yeah, that's kind of where, I got my love of being outside was my dad.
I love that. And the animals add such an enrichment to the childhood experience. Um, I'm interested in what your process is when you integrate a new species into your homestead. For beginners, I wonder if you would agree with me that chickens are one of the easiest livestock to get into at first. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's so many ways to do chicken keeping, so it can get confusing, but really it just takes like getting into it and seeing what works for you and what might work for one person may not work for you. So it just really just takes like just get them, start off with a quality coop, which I was going to talk about a little bit later, but just
Right.
get your feet wet, start small, but plan for big. Because you won't stop at the 5 chickens you grab, in the first time around. You're going to expand it.
I love that. Okay, and Shani, could you give us a little bit more of your background story as well? I know you gave us some in the introduction, but we'd love to dig in more on how you ended up expanding to full homestead scale projects with all your diverse experience.
Yeah, so my first gardening experience was at a neighbor's small historic farm. I was picking basil for her. She had like, her basil would bolt, and I'd have come out and pick the basil blooms to keep them from bolting. And that was when I was a little kid. Um, I grew up on a small island off the coast of Rhode Island, so just 3 miles wide, 7 miles long, a tiny little town. And so my neighbor had a historic farm. I would go and pick basil at her place, and I did grow up on a little farm, but we were a horse farm. We would take tourists on guided trail rides. So we always kept a little garden, but horses would usually break in and ruin it. Horses and vegetable gardens like really, really don't mix. You have to have really good fencing in order to prevent that from getting destroyed. So as it always seems to happen, I wanted to do like the opposite of what I grew up doing. So I didn't want to do horses. And I went off to college, and I got a bachelor's in environmental horticulture and sustainable agriculture from the University of Rhode Island. And I had some really fascinating classes: plant physiology, entomology, plant propagation class, pests and diseases, classes about pesticides. It was a really well-rounded education. It was from a land-grant university. So there was a lot of research being done at that university, and also some really great teaching. So I'm super grateful I did get to get that background. And then after that, I moved to the Missouri Ozarks, and I worked for a seed company there for just shy of 10 years. And I was a co-garden manager, and I also worked for their heirloom seed catalog. And I was writing descriptions and making gardening how-to content. And then I, about 6 years ago, moved to Florida, where I got kind of initiated to Central Florida gardening, which was just a world different than what I had experienced my entire life before that, because this climate's very unusual. So we're growing over the winter. The spring and the fall are very important shoulder seasons. And then the summer is really only for like supremely heat tolerant crops. So things like edible forest gardening, food forests, edible tropical perennials are much more important for truly sustaining yourself and feeding yourself than things like annual temperate vegetables, like the European style gardens that we're maybe more accustomed to up north. So that's been a massive learning curve. So for the first 5 years that I was in Florida, I was growing at community gardens, and I had a couple plots on people's private property that I had just worked out a deal with. And so I had extensive growing happening over the last 5 years, but in this past year, my husband and I bought an acre and a half of land and a home on it. And we also have 2 kids. And so I've been installing a food forest and planting up gardens along the acre and a half of land. So that includes all of the kind of invisible work that's really hard work, like fencing the property by hand and laying the irrigation and designing the irrigation for the entire property. A lot of this stuff is pretty labor intensive, and it definitely is not a one-man job. I did it with my husband. I was pregnant when I was putting up the fencing and putting in the irrigation. It was like a lot of work, but now we've reached the really fun part of the process where we're designing the food forest and laying it out. We're selecting, really tasty varieties to put on the land. And so that's kind of the phase that I'm at now. We just got chickens. We've been on this property for 1 year, but I spent a lot of that first year working on the house because it was a fixer-upper. And so now we're kind of getting to enjoy ourselves and do the planting and the designing. And I'm also doing a lot of traveling around, meeting other gardeners and growers to sort of taste test varieties that I want to commit to and plant on my property. Because it's a food forest and these plants are long term, I want to make sure I get the starfruit variety that tastes the best. I don't want one that I'm kind of like on the fence about, because something like starfruit does produce hundreds of pounds of fruit a year. So you want to make sure that you really select the right variety there. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now with the garden is I'm in the designing and planting phase, and I've got multiple elements. I've got a raised bed garden, I've got in-ground row crops, and I've got a food forest. So, and I also have a little nursery where I've got some landscape fabric laid down with potted plants. So I've got sort of 4 major growing zones, and I've got things sort of in the works with each different location.
That is super fascinating. I also have experience farming up in New England, as well as farming in the South and farming in the Pacific Northwest. And growing in all those different climates is such a mega mental shift of the type of agriculture you want to do. And so I think I love your story also because you really have studied plants and you grew up with the horses and you found that didn't work with row cropping, and now you're going into these a lot of perennial based systems. Super intriguing, and I think really inspiring for anyone watching out there who, whether you're a beginner or you've been gardening for decades, there's always these entry points into different parts of homesteading, whether it's, working on farms like some of us has done, or getting to know family members that have surprising agricultural backgrounds, or just starting out by watching YouTubes and just getting your hands dirty and experimenting. You really don't need any sort of formal education or job experience to dig into any of these homesteading projects. In fact, I'm sure everyone here has had the experience of just going for it, reading a book, maybe watching some YouTube videos and creating your own systems as you go. So, but it's really fascinating to hear all the different types of educational and experiential backgrounds we've had. One common theme I noticed is the animal and plant integration, which is such a crucial part of ancient agricultural systems and any form of sustainability. So Meg was talking to us about her bees, and Nikki, of course, with her chickens and her goats and other animals. And then Shani mentioned how like horses did not fit well with food production, and how she's found other animal integrations that seem to work better. So maybe we could dive into that a little bit more, of like some real logistical tips and exciting inspiration on how we can integrate animals into our plant systems and why that is so important for the soil and for the health of our crops. Meg, do you want to start by digging into a little more bee stuff?
Okay. Yeah, I think like definitely if you are thinking about getting bees, obviously they fit so well in any environment, especially if you have a garden, because they're going to be like little pollinators for your garden. Um, and I think that they just fit into your ecosystem. I personally, I just try to look at my entire backyard as its own little mini ecosystem where everything has a balance, everything has a purpose, like with, feeding the chickens greens from the garden and then using their poop as fertilizer, and it all kind of like circles back. And that's the same with the bees. The bees are going to pollinate, and then you get to have a little sweet treat of honey. And also, you're kind of helping the bee populations, which have been on the decline for many years. Thankfully, now they're kind of on the incline because of beekeepers like us. But it's really important to keep the bees around, and they just contribute. I think like if you are thinking about getting bees and how to fit them into your garden space, that's like my video that is later today. That's what it's all going to be about, is just, beginning with beekeeping, very first steps if you're thinking about beekeeping. But it's just about finding a space that they'll work, and bees can fit in a lot of crazy spaces. I've seen a lot of like very creative things with bees. Like I've seen people keep bees on their balconies in the city, rooftops, on top of chicken coops. Um, One thing I think like with a cycle, I guess that to tie into like the garden and the ecosystem and how the cycle can work with bees and chickens and gardening and everything. Um, is that the chickens can actually help bees if you have chickens and bees together as well. So I have my hive in with my chicken coop, or not my chicken coop, but my outdoor run, and the chickens they can forage around the beehive and they can eat like hive beetle larvae, which is a pest of bees. Um, so again, yeah, it's all just a cycle.
I love that ecological combo between the
Yeah.
bees and the chickens. Do you know if chickens can eat the varroa mites, which are another major pest of bees?
Unfortunately not, because the varroa mite is like attached to the bee. So the chickens can't get into the hive. So the bees are safe from the chickens. And like usually the bees don't bother chickens as well. It's like really hard for a bee to get through all those feathers to sting. And usually bees aren't very aggressive towards chickens. Um, but yeah, the varroa mite is a different issue because it's attached onto the bee. But there's other things like wax moth and small hive beetle. So small hive beetle is like a really huge issue, and they will actually breed in the ground around the hive. So that's where the chickens can come in and they'll eat the grubs that will eventually turn into the small hive beetle that will eventually get into the hive. So it's like yeah, they help each other out. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Nice. The
Yeah.
symbiotic ecology just happening on a small scale in your
Yeah.
backyard. Nikki, have you found integrations and symbiotic relationships between your animals in any similar ways?
So I feel like my chickens work really well with the garden, obviously. Their bedding, their manure is really great for composting. So we definitely compost, everything we remove from the chicken coop. They're great at cleaning up kitchen scraps too. So I think that's like a great way not to have a lot of food waste. And then my garden, like they help with clearing out, like I said before, clearing out the garden. They have access to it all winter, so it kind of gives them that little extra forage space. They fertilize my garden beds and stuff. They hop right up in there and they take care of it. I feel like my goats and my chickens are not together, so there's no like crossover there. They do well together. I've always put like rescue chickens in with them before I integrate them in with my flock, and they will ride on the goats' backs and stuff and have fun. And they help like turn their manure. They help clean up, the area in there. So I may add some chickens in with them eventually, but we'll see. Right now I've got the geese in there, so they kind of do that. But I think like chickens work really well. I do have bees like Meg. Mine are not doing as well as hers. I'm super new at it. But the chickens work really well with gardening. You can like, just attach it. Mine's attached to the end of my big outdoor chicken run. So it has a little door, open it up, and they get access when we're ready to do that. And then also like during the season while I'm in there working in the garden, they all wait by the fence because they know I'm going to throw any pests that I find over the edge. I'm going to throw any weeds that I pull, and they just take care of it. So it works really well.
Love that. And you mentioned how you let your chickens, obviously, you've designed your garden specifically to be integrated with chickens. What advice do you have if people aren't quite to that point yet, but they still want to bring chickens integrated into their system? Do you always compost their manure, or do you like leave some beds fallow until the manure breaks down? What's your strategy for chicken poop management and enriching the soil?
I usually compost it first just because it takes so long for chicken poop to be composted and safe for the garden. It's really high in ammonia. So, I usually give it a good 6 months before I will integrate it back into the garden. But my bedding from like my brooders, where there's just not as much poop in there, and I'm changing it way more often, I will use that to top off my gardens. And I use hemp bedding, so it holds moisture in really well. Like my garlic bed before winter hit, I topped it with brooder hemp that, was only with those chicks for a week or so before I cleaned it out and replaced it, and give it kind of a second purpose. And I don't have to compost that because there's just not, not that many chicks in there, creating a problem. But, the more in the coop with the droppings, there's just a whole bunch. So I have like 36 chickens in that one big coop. And then my other coop is, smaller, but, for that, I will compost that because it's just so dense in their droppings.
Cool. And when you're pulling bedding out that's already mixed with manure, you have a nice carbon and nitrogen ratio going there, right? But like you said, chicken manure is so high in ammonia, and actually coming from a certified organic vegetable background, we had pretty stringent regulations on how long we had to compost, the proper temperatures that our compost had to reach, and then how long it was until we could harvest a crop from a field treated with chicken manure. So it's cool to hear that you're applying basically the same principles on a home scale. But do you add a significant extra amount of carbon, or is the mix of the bedding and the manure usually pretty balanced for the compost?
I used to when I used like pine bedding and stuff, but because I use hemp bedding, it's just more absorbent. It breaks down a lot better. Well, and we have like, if we're cleaning up leaves and stuff, I throw it in, but I'm not real conscious about how much I'm adding in because we do have a lot of
Nice. So you go with the time is on your side
Yeah.
method of composting, right? 6 months and you're like, I'm good.
Yeah, and I have plenty of space to do that. We've got multiple piles that we're composting at the same time, so it's not like have to be really logistic about how that happens. I'm just like, it's fine until I'm ready for it.
That's awesome. And that makes things so accessible too. Because of course there's the nerds of us like me who are like, I'm out there, taking the temperature by compost and like measuring the volume of greens to browns and tracking my ratios. But you don't have to be that nerdy and obsessive about it. You can also have the passive way and it's still totally safe. It's not stinky. It's not going to be problematic as long as you keep that compost dry under cover, right? If you get a lot of rain in your area and you have enough of that carbon balancing out the manure, you don't need to be a composting expert to deal with your livestock manure. Would you agree, Nikki?
Right, yeah. I'm definitely not a compost expert. I'm a set it and forget it kind of person.
I love that. Cool. And Shani, how are you going to incorporate animals into this perennial food forest system, or do you plan to?
I do. Yeah, so I've currently got my chickens and so two animals I've got right now are my worm bin and my chickens. And in Florida, it is not uncommon. It's happened to me in the past where your worm bin can be like thriving over the summer, and sometimes it just kind of gets taken over by black soldier flies or your worm bin will be thriving over the winter, spring and fall, but then in the summer when it gets super hot, you have to really try to keep them as cool as possible. But I have lost, my worm bin before, and it's kind of transferred over to a black soldier fly bin. And chickens love to eat black soldier fly larvae. So we're thinking that we're probably just going to nurture our own black soldier fly bin. We're going to try to keep our red wigglers alive over the summer best we can by keeping the worm bin as cool and shaded and well watered as possible. But I think we may get into some black soldier fly larvae so that we could be feeding our chickens just as a little symbiotic. And the black soldier flies are really efficient at breaking down kitchen scraps. I've got a toddler and myself and my husband, and we eat a ton of veggies and we have a lot of scraps. So there's a main kind of highway between our kitchen and our worms, our regular compost, and what will soon be our black soldier fly compost. So nice. I'm definitely looking forward to kind of moving that system along. I also am really into trading right now. So I traded some jicama tubers for some bunny poop from my neighbor. I've had rabbits when I was a kid. We had like a little hutch. I'm not sure that I'm ready to get into those right now because I have children and it's too busy, but bunny poop is my favorite poop for the garden. It's a cold manure, which means that it is ready to be used right away on your garden. You maybe wouldn't put it on top of your greens because you don't want anything that you're going to be eating, directly out of the garden, not cooked. But if you have a tomato plant, you can throw a handful of bunny berries, as they're called, or bunny poop, right fresh from the hutch into the planting site, and it's a cold manure. It's not going to burn your plants. So bunny poop is like, I'm like a evangelical about bunny poop. I'm like really like just be proselytizing till the day is done. I love bunny manure. I may do a hutch one day when I have a little more time to commit to like really caring for animals. But for now, the chickens are the thing that we're really focusing in on. And, you know, Nikki was kind of touching on it and you were touching on it. I definitely try to keep the chicken manure in great quantities. I try to keep that out of the garden for a couple seasons to let it break down before I put it in. But if you have like little, like Nicole was saying, you know, little scattered amounts, and you're maybe say you're throwing it over your orchard around your established fruit trees, you're not going to burn them. Maybe I'm not going to take like a ton of fresh chicken poop and put it right in my garden. That's not going to happen because of the urea, the amount of ammonia. It does need a few years to break down, but yeah, so that chicken bedding, that chicken manure, I'll use it sparingly. And since I have an acre and I have a dried up lake bottom on my back half acre where I've got an orchard, that's a great place for us to be tossing chicken droppings and bedding. And then for the stuff that I want to use right now, I will definitely be hitting up my neighbor with his chicken poop because he's, you know, only got so much garden space to use his I said chicken poop, his bunny poop. So yeah, rabbit poop, trading with my neighbor, chicken poop directly on the farm, and a little black soldier fly action to kind of round out the circle of life.
Nice. That is quite a little mini ecosystem and a great reminder that you don't actually have to have the animals on your property, on your homestead to use them. That's where all the aspects of community get involved. And a lot of times when you meet people with livestock, especially horse people, I'm sure Shani could attest to this, they actually will give you their manure like gladly, free of charge, right? If they're not using it on their farm. And I know many like sheep growers, cattle farmers, etc., who have waste products coming from their land.
Actually, I have to share this.
Okay.
Because I grew up on a horse farm and we had way too much horse manure for whatever gardening we were doing. So we would deliver horse manure. And there was a famous actor who lived in our town and he had a garden, and my dad would brag that he was the official manure man for this famous actor. And he would kind of brag around town that he was this guy's official manure hookup. So I have a long storied history of animal poop. It is really goes back to shoveling poop when I was like a really little kid on the farm. So yeah, I would say definitely manure is it's in my DNA.
I love that. And it really is the gold of the garden. I love your obsession with rabbit poop. I also think rabbit poop is the ultimate gold standard of manure. But a mention on the chicken manure, just so nobody gets like frightened. It's not the risk of nutrient burn is there, of course, with any raw poop except for rabbit poop. But it's not nearly as high as what might happen if you dump a synthetic nitrate fertilizer, a large amount in a small bed. That's a lot more likely to actually burn plants than a, let's say, 2 to 3 month aged chicken manure that's not fully done. You just don't really want to use manure of any kind really in your seed starting mix. Again, with rabbit manure being the exception. I've totally germinated seeds in rabbit manure because it is that light, or I forget the term you use, Shani. It's cold.
I think cold.
There we go. Yeah.
It's classified as a cold manure.
Cold manure, exactly. But anyways, I love the way everyone's using animals in different ways. And like I said, you don't have to necessarily have them on their property. You can expand your ecosystem far beyond your garden. And even if you're in the middle of the city and you can't have any access to a farmer to deliver manure and be your celebrity manure provider, or have your own chickens, you can always purchase those products in store. And it's so important to integrate that decaying animal matter into the soil to support the soil microbiome and create like a healthy ecosystem that can actually fuel your crops. You're not so reliant on bringing in external fertilizers. In fact, you can completely eliminate the need for external fertilizers once you're able to get a healthy soil food web going in your different garden beds and enrich those regularly with compost, manure, veggie scraps, etc. So shifting gears a little bit, I was wondering if any of you ladies had some insights or kind of background knowledge on what you would have changed in the order of how you built your homestead? So I know a lot of us, you're thrown into things and you have to do them as they happen. You obviously have to get your house done first if you're starting on raw land. If you're starting in your backyard garden, you probably need to clear your lawn first. But a lot of times we don't get to do things in the perfect order we would have liked. And hindsight is 2020. So maybe Meg, could you start us off with sharing a different order that you might have gone in, or maybe the perfect order that you found if you were to start all over again?
Yeah, I don't know if I would change my order. I started with the garden, and to me that was just like the easiest thing to start with. Because it's like really low stakes. You can be successful with a garden, but at the end of the day, like, you're not killing animals, like you're killing plants. This is a little bit different. So I think I like that I started with my garden, and I think I like that I kind of took it slow. Like I gardened for about 2 years before I decided to add chickens. Um, the chickens to bees went a little bit quickly, and maybe I would have spaced that out a little bit like longer. I might have like gotten the chickens, like mastered them first before diving into the bees. I kind of overwhelmed myself a little bit by like getting chickens, and then less than a year later I got bees. Um, but I got the chickens after the garden, and I think that personally, I think that the chickens can be a bit easier than bees as far as like the stakes, like the risk involved, because I think bees can be a bit difficult. And personally, I think bees do require like a little bit more education before, like a little bit more prepping. Like, I think you need to be educated before getting chickens too, obviously. But I think with bees, like it's a whole science, and you have to like know specific things education wise to like keep a hive alive, if that makes any sense. So I like my order: the garden, the chickens, and then the bees. Yeah.
I love that. So the vegetables, particularly, you said you started with raised beds, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Because I live in North Carolina, and again, like I'm in an urban environment. So I don't have like a huge space like in ground garden anyway. But our soil here is so dense and it's so clay, and it would have taken me years to amend it. And I wanted to start now. Like as soon as we got this house, I was like, this is my time to shine. This is my time to finally have a garden. I've wanted one for forever. And so I'm not waiting. And I think raised beds are like an easy way to like quickly get into gardening because you have more control over the soil in the raised beds. And North Carolina clay soil, if you live in North Carolina, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It is just awful. So yeah.
Totally understandable. And you forgot to mention you actually technically started in containers, right? Because you started with houseplants in the very
Ah,
beginning.
yes, you're correct. Yeah, I technically did start in containers and indoors and balcony gardening. I had a really small balcony, but I did grow some herbs, and I grew a pepper plant, like one singular cayenne pepper plant on my balcony. Um, but yeah, and I love container gardening. I still do it to this day. Like I have grow bags everywhere as well. Like I have the raised beds, but I also have grow bags, and I kind of pretend like I still have a little balcony. Um, Personally, I prefer container gardening every day. But if I had like farmland, of course, I would. I think it's just more like financially resourceful to go in ground if you have like a large plot of land to work with, for sure.
For sure. But those containers and those small raised beds and grow bags are definitely the most accessible. I also
Yeah.
started my very first garden when I was like 17 on this balcony that was like very small, maybe 5 foot by 8 foot. And I counted over 100 species of plant. I somehow crammed into this small space because I had every railing, I had vertical growing, I had grow bags, and I was like, I'm doing this. So I think that's really inspiring. I know there's quite a few channels on YouTube with balcony gardens. So you really can start anywhere, and having the control of the soil and of the growing space in a container definitely makes things a lot easier. But then, of course, on the flip side, it's harder to create a self-sustaining system, right? Because you're continuously having to bring in external inputs to add to those containers or add to those grow bags. And speaking of grow bags, I really wish back in those days I had the Epic grow bags, because I remember having so many problems with, like, I would grab the handles of this giant tomato plant I'd cultivated this whole time, and I want to like slide it in if a frost was coming, and the handles would break off and like soil would fly everywhere, and it was such a wreck. And the Epic grow bags are like indestructible, but I didn't know that
They
we
really
didn't have those
are.
back then.
They're very sturdy. Yeah, I've had many a time where you go and like lift and it just poof, like the handles break off.
Yeah.
Not with the Epic ones, but the like I got some from Amazon. I think my first ever grow bags were just like whatever was cheapest that I could like find out there, which is okay too.
Yeah, for sure. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
So, Nikki, would you change your order at all, or do you also like the way you got started?
Yeah, I think I agree with Meg. Like I do like the order that we did it. Obviously having some experience with gardening really helped, I think, because then you kind of get that under control. And then if you add something in, your garden can support that. And then you can figure out how they support your garden. In my case, it was chickens next. And so, I already had the gardening under control, chickens come in. I'm able to, then spend time figuring out how they can support my garden, but then also obviously my garden is supporting them. And then I would say, like how Meg was saying, she went from chickens to bees really quick. I think I probably would have slowed down. It was one of those things where you get the land and then you're like, I have to have all of it. And so, we added the goats and the geese and then the bees, and I feel like it was all super fast. And so, I think I would have maybe slowed down a little bit on that, because now I'm like, trying to, you play catch up. So, trying to figure out, okay, wait, I got to get a system in place. So, my garden can now, expand to like a flower garden around here. And I want to make sure my goats are sustained a little bit with the stuff I'm growing. And, there's no like good system with all that. So I would say, like, take it one step at a time, unless like you can make it like your full-time gig, or, I had little, I still have younger kids, they're 9 and 7. So like for that first, 7 years, I've got little ones under my feet like Shani does. And it's like, you got to obviously give them your attention first. And oh, there's a frost coming, I didn't cover my plants, or, whatever. So I feel like if I would have slowed down a little bit, it would have been better for my mental stability. But now my kids are older. They're out in the garden and with the chickens with me. They're at school all day long, so I can really focus on everything. So I feel like I'm in a good place with that. But yeah, I like the order that I did it. Just like what Meg said, maybe slow down a little bit on adding stuff in so you can, fully learn all the things that you can benefit from and how to handle everything.
Good advice, but easier said than done, right? Because once you get excited and you're going, you're like, I want more.
Yeah.
Shani, would you stick with your order of things? Because you've kind of had a blank slate on this new property. I'm interested on how the order of things is going there.
Yeah, I don't think I had a choice. I kind of, so we bought the land. It was, an acre and a half with a small concrete block house on it. And I kind of was forced to do it the way that I did it because, the previous homeowner had planted up a little food forest. He actually worked in the horticulture industry too, which was kind of funny. I knew his employer. And the neighbors were throwing their garbage on our property. So I do like to mention this. It's not the most glamorous part of my story, but it's a really, really common thing for anyone who is working class and bought a piece of land that they could actually afford. You might have had somebody dumping on this land. You might have had unscrupulous stuff happening on the property that you can't control. And for us, it was the neighbors dumping on our land. So our first order of business when we bought this property was to pull trash. I had trash bags. My husband and I were pulling trash. I had a baby, strapped to my back, and or my husband would be carrying her. And that was the first order of business, was pull the trash off the property. Then it was to finish the fencing project that the previous homeowner had started, but he never finished. So I finished fencing on the land. That was also important because the neighbors were throwing trash on the property. If the fence had been up, the neighbors wouldn't have been able to do that. So, and also there was a bear involved. The bear was also dragging other neighbors' trash onto our land. So it was like partially humans intentionally throwing things over their property line and partially bears. So either way, we had like a host of vandals doing wild stuff to our property. So we had to fence it. I had to build a come along. We had to attach it to the back of my pickup truck and pull cattle panel fencing, some like pretty strong security grade fencing to keep animals like the bear and the neighbors from being able to, trespass on the property. So it was clean up trash, then put up fencing. Next, it was irrigation. Irrigation is an absolute must where I live in Central Florida because we have bone dry winters. The climate is so different here, but basically the best temperature time of the year is the winter, but that's also the driest time of year. So the time that you're really thriving and growing is also the time you absolutely have to have irrigation. You could never just like wing it and not have good irrigation. And hand watering, you'd be spending all your time hand watering because the soil here is sugar sand. It's like pure sandy soil with very low organic matter, which means that water holding capacity or the ability for the soil to hold the water is very poor. The soil is very porous. So I installed PVC pipe, 3/4 inch PVC pipe was dug 3 feet deep and run across my property. And then I put together PVC and polyethylene tubing on timers. So I have a drip watering system. So it was clean up, fencing, irrigation, and then it was planting and finally chickens. I don't think I could have done it any other way, just because, like I said, it was sort of predetermined for me. One thing I would do is the existing bananas that have been planting, I would say that's like the skeletal structure of our food forest was these bananas that the previous homeowner planted. He never let us know or marked up what variety they are, and they kind of they don't fruit. They're pretty disease susceptible. So I would say the one thing I wish I could change was probably a blank slate on our bananas, and we might since they have all succumbed to disease, I think we are probably just going to have to wipe the slate clean and dig our corms and start fresh. Or we're just going to have to cut them all back and see if their new growth comes back healthy. But yeah, diseased bananas were a big bummer here. We arrived going like, woo, bananas. We're going to have like tons of racks of bananas. It's going to be awesome. And then within a couple months, we're like, diseased bananas, boo. Like, we can't eat these. What a bummer. So, gotta can the bananas. But other than that, I think it had to be the way it's gone so far. And I do really like to share those realistic experiences because that is really what it is, man. Unless so maybe you got lucky, but a lot of times, yeah, your property hasn't maybe had the care that it deserves.
Gosh, yes. Thank you for sharing the real behind the scenes. Definitely bears and neighbors and trash. All of those things can wreak havoc. And I love how nature just really told you like the flow of the way things had to be, which is why we can't get too far ahead of ourselves when we get really excited. As I'm establishing a new homestead here in Wyoming, it's like infrastructure is first. I can't start seeds as much as I want to this spring. It's like there's really not anywhere to plant them and grow except indoors in containers with with grow bags and everything. So you can always get your green thumb going, but you got to take care of that infrastructure first to make sure everything's protected and safe and watered and everything. So
that's the character building work too. Is that really like that gritty stuff? I agree. You'll never feel more proud of yourself, even though it's awful work.
For sure. You definitely feel really powerful after like putting up acres and acres of fence. I can say that from experience.
Yes.
But unfortunately, we are running out of time. All of these lovely, brilliant ladies will have their own panels later on during the event. So be sure to go check them out. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Element. If you want to drink some electrolytes while you're gardening this season, you can get a free sample pack at drinklmnt.com/GGA, specifically for our great grow along audience. And be sure to tell your friends about next weekend, where we'll have a lot more panels going on, March 15th and 16th, for the final hurrah of this year's Great Grow Along. Again, I'm Logan Haley with Epic Gardening. This is Meg, Nikki, and Shani. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a beautiful day.
Thanks.
Bye.